Welcome back to the Dershow. Obviously, between the time we spoke yesterday and today, the president gave almost a 2 hour speech. Wasn't called the State of the Union, but it was really a State of the Union. It was no difference, including the Democrats' reaction with their silly signs and all of that. The president speech was predictable. He was very strong. It certainly was riveting. I mean, you couldn't leave. I mean, he delivered it extraordinarily well. He was Donald Trump. He was who people voted for. You got what you saw. You saw what you got, and there it was. And you also saw what you got from the Democrats. You get Al Green, who I have called a thug. Now, people have said, "Oh my, you can't use the term thug." Let me tell you what I mean by thug. And when I call him a thug, he's the guy who deliberately was kicked out of the House. I mean, he did this deliberately. He provoked. He screamed and yelled until the Speaker of the House finally said, "You have to leave. We have to restore decorum." He did it quite deliberately. He's a thug. So some people have said, "Oh no, thug. You can't use that term." Here's what the dictionary says that the meaning of thug. A thug in Black people's speech, interesting, is somebody who is a ruffian, but in being a ruffian is displaying a healthy sort of countercultural initiative, displaying a kind of resilience in the face of racism, etc. Of course, nobody puts it that way, but that's the feeling. And so when Black people say it, they don't mean what white people mean. Well, I don't know. In the dictionary, I don't think there are two dictionaries, one for white people and one for Black people. But when I use the term thug, I use it in a way that doesn't suggest necessarily that he's violent, or I don't know whether he's violent or not. He's walking around with his cane, but that he's utterly unwilling to play by the rules, that he's engaged in kind of thuggish behavior. And I have absolutely no doubt that he was engaged in thuggish behavior. Look, the other Green in the House, Marjorie Greene, also interrupted. If I were the Speaker of the House, I would have the following rule. I think it's a rule that's consistent with freedom of speech. And remember, freedom of speech, the First Amendment doesn't necessarily operate on the floor of the House. But I would say this. There are two approaches that seem consistent with the First Amendment to reacting to the speech of a president in Congress. You can have what I call the court approach. So a judge, before he announces or she announces the verdict in a criminal case, says, "Look, I'm going to announce the verdict. There is going to be no applause and no booing. There's to be no reaction. You can't, yes, say we approve of it. You can't say we disapprove it. Silence." Okay, that's okay. That's a fair approach to a judicial proceeding and maybe even a legislative proceeding. What I think you can't do is say, "We will permit clapping but not booing." I don't think you can do that. I think if you permit clapping, you have to permit booing. Now, you can say the claps can be limited to half a minute. The boos can be limited to half a minute. Nobody can interfere with the right of the speaker to continue the speech. And of course, what Green did deliberately was intended to interfere with Trump's ability to go forward. But I don't think a rule that says you can show approval of the speech but not disapproval of the speech would satisfy my notion of the marketplace of ideas. And that essentially is the rule today in Congress. You can clap for as long as you like. There were some ovations that lasted for, minutes, but you can't have sustained booing. I don't think that's consistent. That's certainly not the way it works in the House of Commons in England. In England, you can boo, you can cheer, you can get up, you can do whatever you want. I'm a great opera fan. I love going to opera. I love going to symphonies, but I'm not used to the reactions we get now. When I was a kid, go back a long time ago, when an aria was finished, you would clap. But today, clapping is regarded as not a sufficient show of approval. So people do this woo, woo, woo. They scream and they yell. And in Italy, I've been to opera in Italy, they boo if there's a soprano who hasn't lived up to her promise. you'll hear boos, or a tenor, you'll hear boos. You'll also hear sustained applause. There are also what are called clacks. That is, opera singers hire people to come and clap. Well, how is that different from the Republicans clapping at everything the president says, and the Democrats sitting there stone-faced? You have this wonderful moment where a young kid is diagnosed with cancer, and the president brings out the head of the guy from the Secret Service who saved his life, basically. And the guy says, I'm going to make you a special agent of the Secret Service. How can you not clap? Not Elizabeth Warren, not Schumer. No. But then President Trump calls Elizabeth Warren Pocahontas. All right. She laughed, by the way, at that. She was happy because it gives her something to campaign on. But we have to have rules, and the rules were complied with generally, except for Greene. Of course, we have Greene on the other side, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and she also disrupted previous. So there's a little bit of that on all sides. I personally was disappointed with the fact the president didn't make two statements. I wish he has said this before, and he is, sure we'll say it again, but I wish he had said, under no circumstances will Iran be able to get a nuclear weapon. He should have said that. That should have been part of his view, and he should have spent at least a minute or so talking about hostages in Gaza. He didn't do that. He prioritized domestic affairs, spoke a little bit about Ukraine, but he has the right to decide what to say, and I have the right to say I'm disappointed. So I was a little bit disappointed. Okay, what else happened yesterday? Well, and today, again, Barnard College, which shouldn't even be allowed to use the term college. Barnard is a fraudulent institution of propaganda. Today, Milstein Hall, named for a Jewish donor, was occupied by a group of anti-Semites, including faculty members who prevented the ordinary business of colleges, including classes and students, to enter and leave, to go forward. Barnard is an absolute disgrace. Let me show you Barnard's the website of a group in Barnard. It's called the Women's Studies, Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies. This is a part of Barnard. This is not just something club that a kid forms. This is part of the curriculum. This is part of the curriculum of a university, college, not a university. And so, smash the white supremacist, CIS, heteropatriarchy. Is that what they're teaching the kids? And here's what the website says. WGSS, that's women's, is dedicated to linking inquiry and action, theory and practice, scholarship and feminism. We work with our colleagues in Africana studies. This is intersectionality. American studies. American studies is un-American, anti-American studies. You can't ever say anything positive about America in most American studies departments. And the Barnard Center for Research on Women. There's no research. This is just all propaganda. To develop analysis and practices that address the current moment, including scholarly discussions. There haven't been a scholarly discussion at Barnard in the last 20 years involving these kinds of issues. Examples here and here: student project with local communities, videos on transformative justice, etc., etc., etc. This is not what a university is. And my tax dollars and your tax dollars should not be going to Barnard. Now, why is Barnard the perfect place for President Trump to cut off all federal funding? All federal funding. And I would hope it would be followed by state funding. Let the school close down. I couldn't care less. Why is Barnard the perfect place? Because unlike Columbia University, of which is a part, unlike Harvard, it doesn't have a medical school. It doesn't do research on anything important. And so if you completely cut out all of its funding, nobody will be hurt. Nobody decent will be hurt. They'll be harder to get the money to make a sign, smash the white supremacist heteropatriarchy, but no legitimate efforts would be set back. Whereas if you take money away from Harvard, you're taking it away from medical research because money is fungible. And but if Barnard's a separate place, and I don't know whether it gets separate funding or whether it only gets funding through Columbia, but I think that the federal government can condition any funding given to Columbia that not a single penny goes to Barnard. Barnard should be closed down. Barnard should not exist. Neither should any of these departments exist. We can't stop that. That's, academic freedom, but we can stop the federal government and any government from paying for this kind of propaganda. And so I am completely in favor of shutting down Barnard. It would be a great first step. Let them start a new school. Let them, start. And we know some very good people, friends of ours, who contribute enormously to Barnard. Some of them have buildings named after them. I don't think they're contributing anymore. And the president, of Columbia says, well, we're doing what we can. No, they're not. They're negotiating with terrorists. They're negotiating with the people who block access to universities. So Columbia is not doing a good job. Certainly Barnard is not doing a good job. So to hell with Barnard. And yes, students will suffer, but there are other schools to go to. You don't have to go to a white supremacist, cis, hetero, patriarchy school. That's not a school. You can go to a decent school where you learn something, where you're taught how to think, not what to think, and where you're not graded on how you stand on patriarchy. Can you imagine a student at Barnard trying to write a third-year paper or an essay disagreeing with these propagandistic views? They wouldn't survive a minute. They'd be thrown out, or they'd be given Fs. I don't think Fs exist anymore. I don't think Ds exist anymore, except perhaps for students who disagree with the group think. So 3 boos for Barnard and let it close down. I couldn't care less. Okay, so let's turn to today's legal issue. It's a very serious important constitutional issue. A 5-4 decision rendered this morning. I mean, literally this morning. I think it was at like 9 a.m. I never remember in all my years of following the Supreme Court, which is more than 6. I clerked almost 6. Did I clerk 60 years ago? 50 years ago? I clerked in 1963. So yeah, I think that's 60 years ago that I clerked. I don't remember a decision ever being issued at 9 o'clock in the morning. This one was, and it was a full decision. I mean, it was a 5-4 decision with the 3 expected liberals, but unexpectedly, the Chief Justice, Roberts, and one of the newer appointments, Justice Barrett, a former professor at Notre Dame University, very, very bright woman, joined the 3 liberals, the 3 liberal women on the court, and got a 5-4 majority. Justice Alito wrote a scathing dissent, and the issue is whether or not to uphold a single judge demanding that the federal government continue to give aid that had been earned previously by actions and statements and activities that had been done under the prior administration. We know that the aid was cut off on January 20th, but the work had already been done, so the money was owed. And so the majority said that money had to be paid. It couldn't be withheld. Justice Alito didn't really take that issue on. What he said, and he had a point, what he said is, do we really want to have a system where a single federal judge somewhere in some obscure part of the country has jurisdiction over the entire United States? He's not a Supreme Court justice. He's not a Court of Appeals justice. Indeed, it doesn't even have to be a judge. He could be a magistrate judge. Issues an injunction, and in this case it was a judge, saying, no, the federal government has to continue to pay to AID. So the question, and a very serious one, legally and constitutionally, is whether the framers of the Constitution, who didn't even write in the Constitution about district court judges, they said one Supreme Court, and obviously you can have lower courts, but can you have a single judge in a single district issue an injunction that binds the entire United States? As Alito says, if the money is paid, it can't come back. So it's a one-way street. This is a final decision. You give the money to an organization. Now, I'm on the side of making sure that good things that are happening through aid happen. There's a lot of bad stuff that's going on through AID, including Hamas is being funded. A lot of Hamas activities. October 7th was funded very heavily by American AID grants done either indirectly or sometimes even directly to Hamas. So I'm not a fan of everything AID does, but the problem with this administration is instead of saying ready, aim, fire, they said fire, ready, aim. I mean, this is Musk. So he says, AID, let's stop giving any money out. Then let's research and see who we should send money to and who we shouldn't send money to. Now, the question is, can you do that retroactively? Can you say we're going to stop giving money even for actions that were taken previously and the money was earned by the people? So, it's a close case, and I can easily understand why it's 5-4. Now, the good news, it's particularly good news if you're not a Trump supporter, is that the system of checks and balances seems to be working. That is, you have the Supreme Court saying to the Trump administration, no, we're not going to let you do this. So all my friends who are crying and screaming, it's the end of the world, oh my God, nobody is checking, all the three branches of government are controlled by right-wing Republicans. No, you're wrong. Justice Barrett was appointed by Donald Trump. She owes her job to him, and she joined the majority. Chief Justice Roberts is a staunch Republican. I remember him when he was a law student. Brilliant guy, nice guy too. He showed my granddaughter around the Supreme Court a few years ago when he just first became Chief Justice, actually. I like him very much. I don't agree with him on a lot of things, but I like him. I certainly didn't agree with him in his decision on abortion. Actually, his decision on abortion wasn't so bad. He would have simply upheld the Texas rule of several weeks. It's the rest of the court overruling Roe versus Wade that I disagree with. I was not a supporter of Roe versus Wade when it first came down, but I think after 50 years, you give it a little bit more deference than overruling it in a case where the issue wasn't even presented, where nobody asked you to overrule the previous Supreme Court decision. They just asked you to limit it. In any event, that's a different argument for a different day, and I know I feel very differently than some of my viewers and listeners do on that, and particularly on a holy day like this, Ash Wednesday. I don't want to upset my Christian listeners and Christian friends whose faith I admire, and who, because of their faith, believe that abortion is a sin. But we don't live in a religious society. We live in a secular society governed not by the Bible, but by the Constitution. So I disagreed with the decision overruling Roe versus Wade. In any event, this decision was 5-4, and it sends a very powerful message, I think, to the Trump administration. You cannot ignore checks and balances. You cannot ignore the Supreme Court. You may agree, you may disagree, but the Supreme Court is going to weigh in. And they did weigh in this case, 5-4 to be sure. And the case is coming back to the Supreme Court. This is, although a final decision on this amount of aid that has already been earned, it's not a final decision on the whole issue of who has the power to withhold and if Congress has authorized it. Those are very complex issues. I think the message is that the Supreme Court is not staying out of this. It's jumping in with all feet. It's going to be in this battle. It's going to be serving as a check and balance on the administration. And for those of you who are structurally supportive of our tripartite system of government, that's good news. For those of you who put your support for Trump or the Republican Party over constitutionalism, not such good news for you. You'd rather have a clear path to allowing the administration to get its way, but it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And as somebody who cares deeply about the Constitution, I have mixed feelings about this. I happen to agree with Alito on the merits that one judge shouldn't be able to enjoin the actions of the executive, but I also happen to agree that this is something the Supreme Court should be interested in, and the system of checks and balances should be applied in a vigorous way. And so it's a mixed result. But the Supreme Court is shaking its finger. 5 justices are shaking their finger at the Trump administration and saying essentially, don't ignore us. We still have the power to tell the executive it can't do something. And President Trump has said, to his credit, he will not ignore a Supreme Court decision. And he hasn't ignored this decision. I'm sure the money will be freed up. He will challenge it. He will bring to bear other cases, and he will try to limit it in whatever way he can. And that's certainly his prerogative as president, head of the executive branch. But as long as he doesn't violate a direct directive of the Supreme Court the way Andrew Jackson said he would when he told the Chief Justice, you wrote the decision, now enforce it. No, he's not going to do that. I hope he doesn't do it. And I'm pretty confident he's not going to do it. So what we see is the system of checks and balances working in a way that I think the framers had in mind. Go back and read the Federalist Papers, and you'll see how brilliantly Hamilton particularly, but, Hamilton J. Madison, how they describe the workings of the system of checks and balances, and how, 220, 30 years later, we still see it working. Not exactly as the framers had in mind, but working in a way that we ought to be somewhat proud of. I mean, we are the oldest constitution in the history of the world that's still in operation, and with only 26 amendments. Unbelievable. And many of them just technical amendments. So if you discount the Bill of Rights, that's 10 already. Then you discount the 12th Amendment, which just fixed the screw up in the Constitution. And then you eliminate the 2 amendments that eliminated each other, the alcohol amendments, and you eliminate the few others that are really highly, highly technical. What do you get? You get about a dozen amendments to the Constitution. That's all. So quite remarkable, and it's working. It's working. You don't like the outcome. You don't like the result. Hey, I don't like a lot of the results of a lot of judicial decisions, but I'd rather have a Supreme Court that I disagree with than no Supreme Court and no judicial review at all. Okay, so let's look at letters. Got a lot of them. A couple of them deal with Iran. Professor, Iran has proved over and over again they cannot be trusted to abide by any agreement to either get rid of the nuclear program or to hold it. I believe Donald Trump knows this and would be more likely to give Israel the green light to take out Iran's capability with a military strike than to sign an agreement. I wish I agreed with you. I'm just not so sure. Trump is very committed to deals, and I think he thinks he can make a deal with Iran that will end their nuclear program. And if he can, God bless him. As I said on the show yesterday, if he would issue a statement that said you have 4 months, dismantle your program with transparency, inspections, and if you do it, okay. But if you don't, we're coming after you. That would be acceptable. But don't know. What I worry about is that he did nominate as Deputy Secretary of Defense for Policy a man named Colby, who has written, he's now tried to retract it a little bit, but he's written that he's not worried about a nuclear Iran. Let them get nuclear bombs. Don't worry. We can deter them. Don't try to tell that to Israelis who are living in Tel Aviv with their family. You will deter them. We'll deter them. These are the mullahs. They don't care if they die. They're getting their 72 virgins in heaven. Dying is part of their life. Look at Sinwar. He said that. He said that to his people in Gaza. Please, please, Israel, kill more and more children so that we can go to the New York Times and CNN and show these dead babies, and it'll put Israel in a negative light. No, you can't expect people like that to be deterred. They have to be precluded, prevented, preempted from getting nuclear weapons. So I don't agree with Colby, and we'll see what the hearings produce and whether he can persuade members of the committees and ultimately members of the Senate that he didn't really mean it when he said it's okay for Iran to get a nuclear arsenal. They're not going to use it. Don't worry about that because they're afraid of dying. No, that's not a persuasive argument. Related question. What did Israel do in its early history to incur the wrath of Iran? The answer is nothing. Israel and Iran were close. They were allies. When I was first involved in defending Israel, Israel's two strongest allies in the region were the two non-Arab Muslim countries, Turkey and Iran, Iran most importantly. And it's only when the mullahs came to power that Israel became the little Satan. It's not that they did anything, it's that who they were. They were a Jewish state. They were the nation state of the Jewish people, and that was unacceptable under Islamic, at least the mullah's interpretation of Islamic law. So it's not what did Israel do, it's what is Israel. Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people, and that's not acceptable to Iran, which is why they are prepared to have 10 million Muslims killed in order to end what they call a one-bomb state, a state in which one bomb could destroy Israel's right to exist. All right, here's a letter I disagree with. Hamas flag raising is tantamount to calling for violence. It's hard to imagine a society where Hamas flags fly being one where the Jews will be safe. Yeah, of course, that's right. Alan is too kind and generous a person. He's projecting his own virtuous filter on others who are most certainly not of the same moral character. No, that's not my point. My point is the First Amendment says you can fly a flag and you can advocate violence. You can advocate it. You can't incite it. And flying a flag is not an incitement under the way the Constitution is interpreted. So there is a constitutional right to fly a Hamas flag, not from a state pole, flagpole, but from your own home. And if they try to convict somebody of holding a Hamas flag, I will unfortunately have to defend them. So please don't do it because I don't want to have to defend them. Okay. I never understood how starting a fire is speech. What if I start a fire with wood instead of a flag? Is that free speech? Sounds like a stupid question, but I don't see how burning anything is speech. I have neighbors get in trouble for having a fire on their own property, yet burning something in public is free speech. No, you're 100% right. The state could prohibit the burning of anything in public, anything. Or they could say, we prohibit the burning of anything more than 4 inches by 8 inches. But they can't say, we prohibit the burning of a flag that shows views that we disagree with. That's where the problem comes up. So if you have neutral rules prohibiting the burning of anything, that's okay. But you can't have rules that are content specific. That's what the First Amendment prohibits. Okay. I did an impression of John Adams' stentorious voice back when the Declaration of Independence was being written, and I, imitated Jefferson's high-pitched voice. And so I get this letter. You should know what Adams and Jefferson's voices sounded like. You were there. No, I'm old, but I'm not that old. I wish I were there. Would have been great fun to have been at the Declaration of Independence signing or at the Constitutional Convention. I've come as close as you can. I've read the original history of it, and I'm pretty familiar with everything surrounding the writing of the Declaration. I have an early draft of the Declaration, not an original copy, but a copy that was done about 100 years after with all the marginal corrections. And so I am a student of both the Declaration and the Constitution. I have an early copy of the Declaration hanging in my living room, and I have early copies of the Constitution as well. A question came to mind during your Epstein discussion. Remember, I said I want everything released in the Epstein case because it would obviously prove my total and complete innocence. I never heard of, never met the person who accused me, and she ultimately acknowledged that she may have confused me with someone else. So that's over as far as I'm concerned. But do you think Epstein committed suicide? And my answer is, I don't know. I know that he was thinking about maybe getting bail. His lawyers had told him he had a shot at getting bail. And I know that he couldn't have committed suicide without the help of other people. So if I had to guess, I would say he paid people to turn off the cameras and to get rid of people in his surrounding area in his cell in order to allow him to commit suicide. That's my best guess, but it's no more than a guess. So I don't think we'll ever know for certain the answer to that question. But again, I'm hoping every bit of documentation, every videotape, every audio tape, every redacted FBI file is produced, because that will prove my innocence. If anybody still believes I'm not innocent, I can't believe anybody would still believe that after looking at the evidence. But if anybody still does, revealing every bit of documentation instead of holding back what they're doing now, the documentation that undercuts the credibility of some of the accusers, I think revealing every bit of the information is my best defense. See you next week.